All right, so now let's talk about vaccines and dewormers. If we could see the same thing in regulations with them. So what about some of our vaccines? Are they pretty well the same that we've been using for a long time?
Right. They are for the most part. There are some new technologies that are coming into the marketplace. But with the traditional vaccines, so one thing as I talk with producers, because a common question that I get as I'm doing this antibiotic change meetings is that, will these changes that are occurring here in the next month or so affect our traditional cattle vaccines, for example? And the answer to that question is no. I don't foresee, at least with the traditional ones, that there will be any prescription required for those in the future. With that being said, we've got some vaccines that are currently available that do require veterinary involvement. Brucellosis vaccine would be an example. Autogenous vaccines, conditionally licensed vaccines, I won't go into the details of what those are, but our traditional reproductive and respiratory vaccines that we use in cattle specifically, I don't see those going prescription status.
Have we seen the resistance in our vaccines like we saw in our antibiotics?
No, there's some viruses that can mutate, and so it depends upon the virus. There's been some discussion about, do we need to update some of that vaccine that we're using to mimic what are the more common mutations that we're seeing in the cattle populations. But from a resistance standpoint, like we think of antimicrobials, we don't see that play out in vaccines. But you do have this evolvement of viruses over time, that the old vaccine virus that it contains may not be current to what is really in the field.
Kind of like our human flu shot.
Right.
We got to get the right strain.
Right. And there's some viruses that they mutate a lot. There's others that are very stable over the long term, and there's not much change in them. So it really just depends on the virus.
And then that strain may go away or may go down where a new one could come up. So
possibly, yeah.
Yes, okay. And dewormers probably about the same way?
Yeah, so the dewormers that we currently use in the marketplace, those will continue to be available OTC. I've heard or have read in the past that, if we see new drug classes of dewormers come out, or there are different drug combinations that are put in the same dewormer. So, for instance, it may be this drug class combined with this drug class combined with this drug class. What FDA has indicated that those will likely be made prescription products. Okay, but for right now, many of the traditional dewormers that we use, I don't foresee them going prescription status.
Okay. Some producers have gotten away from antibiotics because of, they can see the resistance. Have the same folks gone away from the vaccines and dewormers, or is that still fairly common?
Yeah, so a lot of producers are still using much of, whether it be vaccines, dewormers, antibiotics. There's some out there, as you mentioned, are trying to pull those out of their system. And it's really kind of all over the board. One producer may be focused on reducing antimicrobial use, but understanding that with that reduction in antimicrobial use, they need to focus on animal health. So they tune up their vaccine program to try to prevent disease in the first place, so that, they're not having to rely upon an antimicrobial to come in and treat it with. You do see some systems that are just going cold turkey. They've dropped dewormers, they've dropped vaccines, but how common that is, I don't know. But it's a diverse industry, so you'll see all different production models. you think about natural and organic programs.
Yes.
You know, those are non-antibiotic use programs. So their tendency is to focus more so on prevention of disease. Again, whether that be through use of dewormers or at the same time use of vaccines. But in the dewormer world, you know, they may be focusing on rotational grazing to try to reduce parasite burdens so that they can reduce the use of those dewormers. So again, it's just a whole bunch of different business models out there that you'll run into.
Sure. Okay. All right. So this going into into spring, going into summer, what's your crystal balls thinking that any livestock diseases that we need to be watching for?
Well, the one that always comes up during the summertime that is one of the most frustrating diseases that we deal with is just pink eye.
Oh, sure.
And so, you know, that would be probably the number one in the summertime that most individuals are battling with.
And what's one of the main management things that they can do?
Well, that's a great question. Nobody's found the silver bullet for controlling pink eye. There are vaccines available that people will use. Some feel that they see a benefit out of them. Some think otherwise. You know, that they don't necessarily be a benefit out of using those vaccines. You know, there's so many variables involved in what causes pink eye. Some I'm sure that we don't even know about. And so UV light, dust, pollen, you know, excessive forage. So as cattle are grazing, they may be scarring the surface of the eyeball if they're getting poked, and that helps the bacteria colonize that causes pink eye. Flies transmit Moraxella bovis, which is the primary organism that we're concerned about. So, you know, I guess as I talk with individuals, you know, we visit about vaccine use. You know, that's possible one thing to consider. Fly control, maybe some type of forage management to reduce that irritation. But again, there's variables that are out of our control as well.
Okay, and it's highly contagious, but treatable.
It is treatable, and that would be which antibiotic to use would be a discussion with the local veterinarian.
Okay.
Sometimes just LA200, LA300 is the ticket, but depending upon what bacteria or organism that is causing the problem, you know, there may be another antibiotic required for treatment than what we traditionally use.
I know when I was a kid, and I told my son the same thing: clip those pastures.
Yeah.
About midsummer, you know, get them clipped.
Yeah. So pink eye is number one during the summertime.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I guess fly control would be a big thing too.
Yeah. Whether that be porons, fly tags, combination of the two.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, again, they not only transmit the organism, but when we're talking about face flies, their feeding activity can cause some damage to the surface or the cornea of the eye, and that will help that bacteria colonize. So the natural defense mechanisms of the animal are important in this, whether that be at the ocular level or just system wide. So you'll hear some talk about the use of, you know, trace minerals, making sure that that's in order to try to help reduce pink eye cases.
Sure. You know, you get a healthy animal is going to be able to fight it off.
Right. More so than an unhealthy one.
That's right. Well, this has been fantastic. Is there anything you want to leave us with?
I don't believe so. No.
So this isn't what they may hear. There's nothing to panic about. You can still use your antibiotics and such. It's just the new labels, when they come out, you'll have to go through your veterinarian.
Crowds that I've got into in talking about this subject around the state, you know, you see two camps. One that constantly works or uses a veterinarian quite often. They wonder how this is going to change what they're doing. I encourage them to think about how they've gotten prescription antibiotics in the past from their local veterinarian, and this is going to be no different when these go from OTC to prescription status. The other camp are those that don't work with a veterinarian very often, and that vet needs to have a veterinary client-patient relationship with that individual before they can, either sell or dispense these antibiotics or write a prescription for them. And so my encouragement to those folks is better to start trying to develop that relationship now instead of after this change goes into effect, when everybody's going to be trying to get that established.
And this isn't for the veterinarian just to blindly write prescriptions or give permission. They're going to try to manage this in this herd.
Well,
when you don't overuse a certain antibiotic.
Well, they'll do it within, with the perspective of we're going to do what's best for the animals. Mm-hmm. And so it may not necessarily reduce the use of antibiotics in that particular operation. The bigger point is that FDA wants the veterinarian involved in that decision to use that antibiotic. Whereas in the past, when they've been available OTC, that's kind of been up to the producer to make that determination alone, or they could make it alone, or they could do it in conjunction with a veterinarian.
And it may let the veterinarian have eyes on the animals a bit more if they start seeing some problems, some resistant problems starting to show up.
Yeah, or a different disease pop up in the system than what they're accustomed to dealing with, or maybe the antibiotic that the producer was getting over the counter in the past was not the ideal antibiotic to treat XYZ.
Sure.
So, this VCPR is defined in our state regulations, and it's just basically the veterinarian needs to be acquainted with the care and the keeping of the animals, either through physical examinations or timely visits to the operation where those animals are housed. That doesn't necessarily mean that the veterinarian needs to be involved in the treatment or needs to examine every animal in which this antibiotic is going to be used. But a veterinarian needs to be familiar with the operation before they sell or dispense that antibiotic or write that prescription.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Payne. And this is today's on Tim's Take, and this is a very timely subject on the changes in antibiotic prescriptions and availability. See you next time.